Okay. Both virtually and in person. I know it's October is busy. Right. There is like, I'm talking with students and it's like a busy time of group projects and papers. And then I know for staff, definitely for LGBT work, this is a super busy time. October is always busy. So I appreciate you all being here. Okay, I'm gonna do just a little bit of introducing myself and doing some like context setting for this talk. The first thing is I've not given this talk before. So a lot of things I do, I'm like, I've done this many times. This is not one of those things. So so we're gonna be in it together and have, you know, as much of a conversation as we can. I am on the Zoom on the computer here, so I'm gonna stay back here. If I start to wander, remind me that I need to go back here because I would do that. My name is Will Sherry. I use he and him pronouns. I'm the director of the University of Michigan Spectrum Center. If that wasn't clear from my mask, which I wish I'd grabbed a different one because I'm walking around campus and people are like, you know, not sure what to make of it. So I'm really happy to be here. I have been working in the Spectrum Center for the past about 14 years. So I'm a social worker. I graduated with my master's in social work from the University of Michigan. I'm always interested in talking to people about social work. So if that's an interest of yours, I am definitely up for that. I love the practice of social work and I love being a social worker in higher education. It's at Michigan, we have a lot of people that have MSWs that work in our student affairs, student life area and all across campus. And so it's something that it's definitely a part of my identity, that field. So as you probably may have noticed, I have not been doing campus center activism for 50 years. As soon as I titled it, I was like, that's kind of misleading. But I'll explain it when I get there. So we are celebrating the 50th year of our center this year. So this, our center, the Spectrum Center, opened in 1971. And so this year, when we opened, the first sexuality center on a college campus in the country. So I'm gonna share a little bit about like our center's history and some kind of takeaways as I look kind of at the history of the center, share some stories from our founder, share just some of my own kind of learning, and then I'm gonna show you a little bit about what we're doing for our 50th anniversary and invite you into those things that are virtual throughout the year that you can attend and participate in. So I might kind of go back and forth with some technology, so just kind of bear with me. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I anticipate talking, you know, maybe like 35 minutes and then really like opening it up. So I know there's a chat on the Zoom where people can share, ask questions, and then certainly in the room as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So when the Spectrum Center opened, it was the year after a big movement called the Gay Liberation Front. And so people are shaking their heads. Some people are really familiar with the Gay Liberation Front, a national movement post-Stonewall. And so that's really what our center came out of. And so here is a quote, and I'm going to read it from a newsletter from around that time that was in Michigan. So it says, "We must realize that although some of us feel comfortable and believe ourselves to be liberated, as long as we quietly allow other homosexuals in other places to be arrested for inviting someone to bed or for cross-dressing, as long as we ignore the lonely desperation of other gays who feel like degenerates because of the need to love, as long as we allow any gay anywhere to be oppressed or discriminated against in any way, that not only are we perpetuating gay oppression by our complacency, but we ourselves, no matter how safe we feel, are in jeopardy." This is something that was posted in, the late 60s, early 70s. And I think it's just, it's both kind of scary how much it resonates. Maybe not all the exact words, right? I might use different terminology. I might talk about it in a different way. But this idea that like, if we are okay with the fact that we are okay, but we are not looking around and seeing sort of what does that mean for others, that we are not doing our work. And that this was central to the Gay Liberation Front, this cross movement set of work, this intersectional. That's really what our office was founded out of, was the Michigan chapter, the Ann Arbor, specifically the Ann Arbor chapter of the Gay Liberation Front. We were founded as the Human Sexuality Office. That was the first name of our center. We were founded with 2 quarter-time employees in a tiny little room, like a little closet, and in the Michigan Union on the 3rd floor. We are still located on the 3rd floor of the Michigan Union, and that's really special. To say like 50 years of, offices moving around and renovations and all those kinds of things, that we have sort of remained stable in that same location. When we opened, there was a little sign, really just written in Sharpie, that said the Human Sexuality Office. And something really kind of revolutionary for the time is that the Gay Liberation Front, that movement in Ann Arbor, called for what was then considered gender equity in the office. So having someone who identified as male and having someone who identified as female, both at equal appointments as co-directors, as co-leaders in the office. Cynthia Gare and Jim Toy are our founders. I have been really, really lucky in my own tenure at the Spectrum Center that Jim Toy, one of our founders, has been in Ann Arbor, has been retired, I want to say like 2010, from another position on campus, but has been like a mentor for me. And that, I feel like that is so rare, to work at an organization that's 50 years old, where the founder is so involved and invested and helping like steer you towards the future. I can remember so many conversations where, I might be struggling with institutional advocacy and wondering like, where do I go from here? What is the best next route? And he is able to provide a perspective. And that's part of what I hope, in these slides, as we all do that advocacy, to sort of see like this is, not just us, that this is such a long time, such a long movement, which is, on the one hand, like, let's get some forward motion at a faster pace. But on the other hand, like, it's a little less lonely, right? When you're able to see like the type of activism that was needed in the 70s and what he was able to do with partners and in community is pretty amazing. And so definitely like hold on to those mentors. I think I'm definitely reflecting now that he is in his upper 90s and not able to come to events the way he once was, not able to remember all the things that he once could in the same way. And I'm already like, I wish I taped this, and I wish I, wrote this down, and I want to like just grab all of it and like bottle it. It's so important to like make time for those kinds of conversations. And Jim has been an activist and advocate for such a long time, and really, has guided the center into today, and continues to do that. So the office was really, founded out of the advocacy of students, staff, faculty, and community. Those like bifurcations and silos weren't as present in that movement. It was about kind of queer people, what would then be termed, I think, gay people, kind of coming together. And that is what I have seen works on my campus. That kind of partnership, right? That isn't easy to push aside. It's not, oh, just students want this, right? It is an entire community with a message and a voice. And I take a lot from that founding. Like, not only do I think that works, but that also then becomes a part of our mission, that our work can't stop at the university, that we're not just here because you pay tuition or because you're a staff member, that anyone is welcome at any of our programs, any of our events. Anyone can come get free HIV and STI testing on Mondays, anywhere. And so we really like work to serve the community because the community is what made it happen. And so we really, situate kind of in our history and let that guide our decisions today. And that's not easy when most units and offices don't do that, right? That's a sort of counterculture to a lot of how funds are used. And so we really kind of push that because it is part of our identity. It's critical to kind of who we are, that we are able to serve beyond our campus. In 1982, our name changed to the Lesbian and Gay Male Programs Office. So you can start to see like how context, right, and terminology has always been evolving. It's always been shifting and changing. And so when we encounter, how that can be challenging for people, how it can feel confusing, I sort of rest in the fact that like that has always been true. Like it has always been evolving, and it's important to evolve. It's critical because it allows people to sort of see themselves in your space. It allows you to reach who you're trying to connect with. This is an article that talks about how the Lesbian and Gay Male Programs Office, when they redid signage in our Michigan Union in the 80s, got left off of that signage. So all the offices had like directional signs where to find things, and it just was not there. And I think it's a really interesting example of some of the pushback that I still feel at times. That like, to talk about gender and sexuality, what do we hear sometimes? Well, that's really personal. Right? It's really political, right? It's not just something that is within a person, that is that we should keep to ourselves, right? So I still feel, certainly to a lesser extent, but I still feel those kind of like insecurities of being out with gender and sexuality work, that institutional, hesitancy, I guess, at times, of going too far, right? Being too much, being too out. And I think that is part of the like internalized socializations that we have to fight against. Like we're not too much, we're not too out. Like we are exactly who we should be. And I think that this is just another example of sort of the ways in which that can show up. Not just in the 80s, but also today. And it also shows how at Michigan, we have always turned to community and to voicing these things, often through our student-led news outlets. I don't know if you have student news outlets here or how active they are, but our student newspaper is an incredibly active voice on campus. And being able to have those outlets to have a voice for that experience and to make it known. It has been always a part of what we lean on to be able to share our own story, right? Not just through an institutional message, which we are very much a part of the institution, but so is the student news outlet, right? And so being able to lean on all those tools to say, this is what's going on, this is what our experience is. In ’84, a local HIV/AIDS resource center opened, and that was not surprising at the time that, you know, the needs, health needs and safety needs of queer people was sort of merging with what the center did. That that HIV was, you know, really impacting in so many significant ways the lives of queer people, that the center really took on and continues to really have that work at the heart of what we do. We have had and continue to have free HIV testing every week in our center. And it's not because you can't get HIV testing somewhere else. Our campus health center probably doesn't love that we continue to do, they don't, that we outsource that to this very organization. The same organization that opened up in 1984 that has been serving queer people in our community since then. And those are the kinds of things that I think really matter, those partnerships, those relationships, that yes, I bet at the health center, someone would get really, really good care. I'm not worried most of the time that like it's going to be a bad experience, but that's not the point. Right? The point is that like this organization is designed to serve queer people. It is not an afterthought. It's not a training that they took, right? One time. It is like their core, their mission, and that's the kind of service that we want to be able to provide through our center when we can. And that those relationships, that's a long history of working together. And so each year when I'm approached about who's going to be doing our testing, if we're still doing testing, and we thought about having our health center, which is amazing, do our testing, you know, I'm always really clear that like we're going to keep doing what we do. And that these are the reasons that we do it. But that kind of consistency only happens when we really engage like the leaders before us, right? Like I wouldn't have known the importance of that if I hadn't been like brought into this work from those that led before me. I would have been like, yeah, why do we? Right? Oh, okay. The university thinks we should do it this way. Like that seems like something we could do, right? And it would make sense, but it's actually like deeper. And sometimes when we're moving so fast and we're just trying to make decisions about programs and services, we can not think through like, why is something the way it is? Is there a reason? Is there a good reason? Is it something we want to move away from or retain? Right? Not all history is good history. And so there's certainly space to make change. But this is a really critical and important partnership for us. In 1993, sexual orientation was added to our non-discrimination policy or our bylaws. This was a 21-year advocacy effort that really Jim Toy and other leaders led on our campus. And that is a really long time. So when this is sort of what I go back to, right? Like when I'm feeling like, do I just give in on this thing? Because it's taking a lot of energy, it's taking a lot of attention. I have to remember that like, you know, sometimes that's just what it is. That like the putting in the time is going to bring progress. And it might take 20 years. And that doesn't mean it's less important, right? Like that is the battle. And so it was pretty early as far as universities go. 93 is earlier than many universities. And so this is, this is key on a campus, a non-discrimination policy that names sexual orientation as a protected identity, right? That's so critical to the work moving forward. It allows for some accountability, right? Not in all the ways that we always need, but it's another tool that we can kind of like lean on and utilize. In 1994, so just a year later, bisexuality was added as well, and really more so, we moved in our programming beyond gay and lesbian programs and services. So really, like the mid-90s was really when bisexual identity, bisexual programmatic initiatives, speakers, education became a big part of the work that we do. Ronnie Sanlow is a former director and was the director in the mid-90s of the Spectrum Center. She's also the founder of Lavender Graduation. Do you all have a Lavender Graduation? Okay, so Ronnie Sanlow founded Lavender Graduation. So we are like the home of Lavender Graduation. We just celebrated a couple of years ago, the 25th anniversary of Lavender Graduation, and Ronnie Sanlow came and was our Lav Grad speaker. And it's so awesome to be able to sort of connect with the person who started Lav Grad, and knew that graduation ceremonies, like you can do a lot of things, right? Graduation, having Lav Grad is my absolute favorite event, so I'll just say that. I think it is amazing to sort of be in an academic celebratory space that celebrates queer people, not for getting there in spite of everything that they had to deal with, but like because of who they are. Like and people wear awesome outfits. So let's just, like, it is an amazing event. People are loving, right? To be in a space where they can really shine, especially sort of the taking back of an event that's highly institutionalized, right? A space that has like a rhythm, like sort of done the same way in all the time. And this is not that. And so Ronnie Sanlow really began to sort of expand in a lot of ways what the center was, who it was for, and began to sort of name and see like that there are many people that may not see themselves in the gay and lesbian programs office. And we'll talk more about those titles and words and name changes. So in 95, also under Ronnie's leadership, the center became the Office of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Affairs. It's long. It's not short, but we can see that really like that this is in the mid-90s, that expansion, that opportunity to really change some of what the center kind of had begun as into a new iteration of a campus center. Ronnie, like I said, founded LavGrad, also started a Speakers Bureau program we now call My Voice, but is, like many people, a panel program. Lots of campuses have them. And expanded the title of the office, and did a lot of work to sort of bring in more voices, bring in more people, and that can inform kind of the future of the center. In 2000, gender identity and expression was a key focus of the center's work. So moving sort of out of the 90s into the early 2000s, I think we were, as a center, becoming more aware of our own sort of inadequacies of meeting the needs of the community. the focus on sexuality historically. I always say it was the first gender and sexuality center, but really it was the first sexuality center, right? That gender in some ways was, I think, an active discussion around binary gender inequity, right? The experience of women compared to the experience of men, but not gender in the way that it exists, really. The expansive identities that people hold were not an active part of the work that was happening, it really until the 2000s. In 2005, we also started our ally training program. So that program has been in place since 2005, and we've been sort of learning and changing ever since. In the later 2000s, we worked a lot on gender inclusive housing, then called gender neutral housing policy. We updated that language some. I started in the center in 2008. So this was kind of around the time that I came into the center. And I remember it really well because at the time, I identified as a butch lesbian. And I started at the center, got hired, I was a social worker. I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna like do this work. I'd never worked with college students. I'd worked in queer community, but not in a college setting. And so that was really new to me. And I remember so many of my meetings in my early time were with students who were transitioning, who were physically and socially transitioning. And I would sit with students and hear their like strength in sort of all of what they were going through, hear their challenges, and our work in general just was really focused on shifting from like a sexuality kind of specific focus. And I remember leaving one day, having a conversation with a student and being really moved just by their, I don't know, I guess I would say, I'm playing with some words that none of them feel right. I would say I was moved by their like honesty, like not their strength but like their honesty. Like this is, you know, how I feel and who I am. And for me, that I think really created some turmoil, like in myself, and some challenge. I think this work is personal, right? It's hard. We show up and try to be some kind of expert, some kind of person to help guide, and that doesn't exist, right? And so I think, especially as a young professional, I felt that pressure. Like I felt like I need to know. Like people here might feel that you might be like a student group leader, right? And others are coming into college and they're like looking at you, like, you know, how do I do this and what do I do? And it can be a lot. I was, at the time that I started at the Spectrum Center, I was like, I don't know, 24 or so. I'm 39. And I remember feeling like, on the one hand, this is a great place if I'm exploring my identity. Like I'm not gonna be fired, if that's real. I'm in a space that's supportive, right? But on the other hand, sometimes when we are visible and we are leaders, there doesn't feel like there's any room to not know yourself, right? And to do that publicly felt like I would lose credibility in some way. I think it really hit on all my own insecurities, right? Like I can't transition when I work at a queer center because I should have already done it. Like, what am I doing working at a queer center and like not sort of knowing these things? And you know, I do think that there is a lot more room today, a lot more room today. When I think about how a conversation like that would go in my center today, I don't think people would feel the same pressure necessarily in the same way, although they may. I definitely did. And it really, I remember leaving the conversation with the student and thinking, I either need to like deal with my stuff or I need to get a different job. Like I can't continue to be on panels talking about my lesbian identity. I can't continue to talk with trans students and like hear their honesty and like reflect back something that isn't my own honesty, right? Like it felt like draining, like something I just could not continue to do. So it was at the time when like our center was so focused on gender, I felt like personally, I was just trying to like hide, right? Like I was just, and it was this real conflict for me in figuring out how to be public in my own way. And I think it's really was a turning point for me. And for anyone that was in the training this morning, I think one thing I try to embody is like a comfort in that like in any of my work, I know the things I know, and for the most part, I don't know a lot, right? That like, that was my discomfort, was like, I felt compelled to know, like I should know all these things. And I think it really was an important turning point to start to say like, actually like this work, queer work, is not about knowing. It's about learning and engaging and building relationships, right? And when we come in like we know, that's actually not helpful. And it puts us at the center, right? Me and my identities and my experiences. And that is just like one piece of a work. And so I really had to go through that in this time and in this place, and had to do other things like, engage in my own therapy and reflection so that didn't happen on students, right? In my work setting, I had to grow up in myself a bit and really start to understand what queer campus center work is all about. And that actually, my own reflections and processes are more helpful in their honesty than holding them back, right? That like the not knowing is something comforting to someone else that feels like they don't. That's actually a huge piece of it and the connection. And so for me, this was a really important time in my own work. I was, at the time we had 4 full-time staff in the Spectrum Center. Like I said, we opened with 2 quarter-time staff, and over time have built up a staff that in the 2000s was 4 people, and we had funding for 1 10-hour-a-week student. So we had 4 staff and 1 student. Today, we have 6 staff, and this year we have something like 14 students or something. And so we have just grown so much as a center, and really invested in bringing students into the work and into the picture. Our name changed to the Spectrum Center in 2008. That was, it was right before I started in the center. But I love the first part of this. It says, after collecting feedback from students, staff, and alumni in a process that began almost 3 years ago. That's so like University of Michigan. Like we asked people what they thought for 3 years. Like that's a long time. That's a long time to be. I'm all for like collecting information, but it made me laugh because I was like, we would. And they would. This was from a news article where they were kind of poking fun at us, I think, a little bit. But we did collect a lot of feedback. I think the article said over 400 people responded to surveys and gave input on our name change. It was focus groups and lunch and learns, like tons of opportunities to talk about, you know, what should the name be. And so coming from the Office of LGBT Affairs, as we called it, and deciding that that wasn't resonating anymore, that those terms, although helpful at times if you're looking for something specific, can also be a bit like, remember how I was just talking about like that feeling like you need to know? There's something about those terms that says, I can't come in here unless I am this, right? And for many people, for many reasons, those aren't their terms. Maybe it's I'm questioning who I am. Maybe it's that all I've ever known about those terms are white people. Maybe it's that I identify with a totally different term that you are not using or including, right? It could be for so many reasons that we felt compelled to really sort of engage in a different name. And so in 2008, we officially changed our name to the Spectrum Center. And I think there was a lot of pushback around that from all sorts of corners. There are times for sure that it makes it challenging because lots of people are not going to know what that is, right? I mean, we have a really huge and diverse campus community that not everyone knows what or tracks to a rainbow flag. Like that has no meaning in their community or culture or space. And so sometimes when we're out and about like tabling at events, it can be hard to communicate who we are and what we do. But I think that that's true in any terminology, right? That like some people have access to that and some people don't. And we need to work through that and be able to speak to who we are in different ways. Generally speaking, I think it's really been successful. I think shifting the name of our center to take out specific identity terms sends a message. It sends a message that like, hey, you're on campus now and like you're coming from a queer household, but you're not queer. Like this is a place for you, right? You have a sibling, you have a parent, you are just interested in learning more. This is absolutely like the center. It's about the work and not just serving individuals who identify like in particular ways. Right? I don't know that hopefully we're not changing it again anytime soon. I don't see the need. Okay, that's my closing piece, and I'm going to pull up a different slide in a minute. But like I mentioned, we are celebrating our 50th anniversary. So I wanted to share with you a couple things that we're doing. Let's see if I can. Okay. So I wanted to share with you our 50th anniversary website to give you some opportunity to like continue to connect with the center if history is something that you're really into. Specifically tomorrow, actually, we have an event, which is the launch of our oral history project. The oral history project is based off of a project that was done at Princeton. And so we built off of that. It's a completely student-led project. So we have a team of student oral historians, and you can meet the team down here. There's like 5 or 6 students. that work specifically on this project and work for the center. They have conducted all of the oral histories as well as made all the artwork, which is awesome. Sochi on our team, that's their artwork. And you can have access to all of the oral histories that we've done. They're publicly accessible through our Bentley Historical Library, which has a link on this website. And I'll make sure you are shared on the website materials. If you go to the Spectrum Center homepage, the 50th site is like right there, and it'll take you there. And so these students have worked across the country, collecting so far 27 interviews. And so there's short commercial clips on here, as well as the full interviews on the library website. And tomorrow we're hosting a panel. It's virtual, anyone can attend. The sign up is right on the website under events. And it's the launch of our oral history project. So this has been 2 years in the making. And certainly the pandemic really shifted things. I didn't know this, but oral histories really have mostly always been conducted in person. It's been like a part of the pedagogy of oral history, is that you do it in person. And so when COVID came, the students had to really engage with our librarian oral historians to like figure out, does it make sense to do this over Zoom? Is there still integrity, right, in that process? And so we did move forward doing Zoom interviews. And so we're going to be launching that oral history project tomorrow. I want to say it's at 1:30. And it's a virtual event. So it'll be a panel of oral historians, students who put the project together, as well as people who were interviewed. And it's like I think it's like a webinar style. So it's like great. I love that. You can like put it on, but you can also be doing something else. And have it on and listen. And there's a Q&A section. But I think that this is such a special project because the goal of it was to increase diversity within the queer archives. It wasn't to increase diversity of the archives with queer people, right? That might be what the archive library wanted, but what we wanted to do was expand the diversity of queer voices in the archive. So it centers people of color, it centers trans and non-binary people as interviewees. And really like seeks to diversify what the queer archives look like on our campus. So it's super cool. Really, really awesome project. I think it's going to be a great event. And it also, it gives us like some of those touch points I was talking about, like listening to stories of others who've been in similar spaces, but maybe a long time ago is a part of our history, right? It's something that we can connect to and know, again, like it is less lonely when there are others who are willing to share like what their experiences were and sort of where they are today. So I'm really excited about that project. The website has, other events and things as well. But the 50th anniversary is a really big deal. I also love our logo. I won't lie, we had a different logo. And like logos are a lot to design. Like we went through a whole process, and then like right before go, I was like, I hate it. I felt really bad, but I'm really glad that I did because now I love it. And so sometimes it's just important to say it out loud. Like I feel like we're going in a wrong direction, right? Like I gotta say it. And I'll say the first logo, something that I didn't like about it is that it had it was like kind of looked like a stamp or a flag. And it had really prominent, like black and brown stripes and inclusion. And there was something about it that felt like we were claiming something that wasn't true. And I just couldn't like sit in that. Like we were like pretending, it wasn't nuanced. It was like in your face. And I was like, that doesn't feel true to who we are. That we are an LGBT center on a predominantly white college campus, and that is our history, and that is also true today. And so, yes, we work and have a lot of initiatives at the intersection of identity, but that doesn't change students' experiences at a PWI. It doesn't change the history of the Spectrum Center. And so I just felt not good when I saw it. I felt like it was like a lie. And so those kinds of things, it's important to like say, right? Even if you're like all the way down the path and it's gonna mean that things are delayed. Because it's better, I think, than to go forward in something that just doesn't feel right and just doesn't feel true. So I do like where we landed in that. And I'm definitely very excited to be a part of and celebrating this anniversary this year. I will also be happy when it's like a year that isn't a 50th anniversary, because all the work continues. Like that's a big major project for the center, but it can't be at the expense of all of the other work that we really need to be doing. I think I don't have a slide, but I think some of what I see for a future, right? We looked sort of from the late 60s until now. I think some of really the future of our work on campus is one, to continue to like integrate the work that we do to make sure everyone sees this work as their work, but not at the expense of losing our space. Physical spaces are I think they're so important. They're so critical. I think it can be wrongly assumed that a place like Ann Arbor, because two women can hold hands and walk down the street, that like everyone feels fine all the time. And it's like, no, actually, lots of people don't. And those two people holding hands probably don't either, right? That there is always still, I think, a need to be explicit in our inclusion, that it cannot be assumed, right? I know I put some major efforts this year on just putting up what my communications specialist would say, gay things. Like I bought, we bought like boards on campus and bus signs, and it wasn't trying to get you to come to something. It wasn't trying to recruit people. It was just so that if you're on the bus, you see something queer. And it like feels good, right? It feels like, okay, like there is something that speaks to me. I know there's a church in Ann Arbor, and I was going in to do a training. And I'll be honest, I'm a little sort of hesitant in religious spaces sometimes with my own experiences. And so I'm going in and I'm like, I don't know. And I walk in and there are literally rainbows everywhere. Like, not because I'm coming, like that's how they do things. And it's not an explicitly queer space. And I immediately felt like so much calmer, right? So much more like seen and safe. I think physical space is super important. I really like the way our new center is set up, and I think it speaks to our future. So our new center is its own center, but then there's a movable wall about the size of this wall that you can open up, and then it's our multicultural center. And so we can make it one big space, and we can have separate spaces. I think what's true is if it was, and I know I'm speaking in a space where it is all in one space, but I'm going to speak my mind anyway. I think that if it was all one space, I think white students would take over the space. And I think that, that is a piece of that door that's really important. My staff at the beginning, when we moved in, they wanted the door open all the time. And they were really asking me, like, what kind of message does it send to close it? And it took a while. It took a while to sort of live into why that was important, right? It wasn't about saying the queer space is a white space, because it's not. It's about saying that, like, whiteness will take over. And there are so few spaces dedicated to people of color. And so we have to understand that, and we can open that door. We have dinners where we have students having dinner with queer and trans people of color who have like just do awesome work in the community. And we just have like dinners, we open the door and have one big table, right? Like there are many times where we are co-programming, where our students, we have a door that you can always go back and forth. Students are always moving back and forth, but to just make it one single space, I think would be a different space. And so I really appreciate like the thought that went into the space and the conversations that have come out of it. That like, I think a lot of people on my own team, didn't see why the door was shut, or felt like it was a message that actually was not quite what it was. And so we're still sort of leaning into the space. It's brand new. And so students are just getting used to it and what have you. But I think that that balance of like, this is everyone's work, and that doesn't mean we're not needed. That is, I think, a big part of our future, is how do we really sort of co-own the need to build inclusive spaces? So it's not always the Spectrum Center, right? That's all of our work, but that actually like the Spectrum Center does have a unique space also, and has a unique role on our campus. I think another piece for our future, and then I need to stop, is really moving to a place of like collective advocacy with students. I think, a lot that in our early history, we see a lot of that sort of cross partnership, building a movement. And then I think like a lot of the most recent years, like the early 2000s to now, has been much more silent. That like students are advocating in this way. And like as an institutional office, this is our role. And like, we're all being good stewards by staying in our lanes. And I think what that does is run us in circles, right? Like we're not really sort of making the progress we could because we are in our lanes. So like, I'm making a little bit of progress here, someone's making a little bit of progress over here, but we're not really sort of like doing that together. So I think a lot of the future of our work is recognizing like, what tables have I been at that actually needs to be someone else, that it needs to be students. It isn't, I'll go back and talk to students and I'll bring that back. Like, no more of that. Like, how do we get seats at a table for students to sort of speak their own experiences, ideas, and put them into practice? Those are definitely some of the things that I see as important to advance our campus plan. That if we continue to just look at administrators to have the answers, it will be much slower, for sure, and not done as well. So I think that getting back to some of our roots around like campus climate impacts me, it impacts students, it impacts faculty, it impacts people who visit. Like, climate is something you feel. It's not just a student experience. And so being able to sort of do that work more collectively and together. So I want to stop there and be able to take any questions. Like I said, I've never done this talk, so it kind of went all over the place. But I really appreciate you all being here, and definitely want to be able to respond to any questions or comments, both online in the chat, as well as here. Yes, there's a question.
Yeah, so I think it was but so I'm going a message and I'm working as the graduate student.
Yeah.
To try to do this sort of initiative.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in knowing your background in the social work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I really lean into thinking about people holistically as a social worker, like people in communities, in systems, right? That like it is not an isolated experience. And so I believe that it is the goals we have for our students to sort of learn and grow and develop. That is actually really benefited by engaging outside of campus. That like, I often think if I could have like, we could do a trans feminine group on our campus and like the same few people are gonna see each other at that group that probably know each other, that already talk to each other. Or we could help students get to the trans femme tea night that is awesome, that happens in town at a coffee shop where there are people of all different ages. So for me, it's mission alignment. It's saying this is what we're trying to do, and we're only using these box of tools. When really, like, it would be most beneficial for the student to be connected to a much wider set of people who have a much wider set of experiences. So then I go to, well, if we're gonna engage in that way, what can I do to support that group? Because I have a feeling whoever's running it is volunteering, right? That community spaces don't often have the resources that we have at a university. So I'm gonna do what I can to utilize our resources to build up sustainable programs that make sense and also are benefiting beyond our campus, because that is something I can do with the privilege and power that I have. Yeah. So for example, like that group I mentioned, one aspect of that partnership is knowing what they want that group to be. Not coming in and saying like, we want to send students here. Like, what do you want for this group? Like, if we're going to partner and I'm going to build off of something that you are doing or have done, I need to do that with humility and from a learning place. So I think that's first. Like, is this something you would want? Does this make sense? I was saying Ann Arbor is, it's a college town. So the idea of like campus and community merging is sort of common in a way. And so I'm gonna, look at what needs does that group have that our partnership could support. So that might look like paying that facilitator an honorarium, like getting money into that space so that people's labor and work is compensated. Because I'm going to be paying a facilitator on campus if I run a group. So being able to bring resources into a space as well as understand the needs. So just before COVID, we did a partnership with that group because when we understood the needs, there were some basic needs that people in that group had, like winter coats. And so when we're talking about the needs, I'm thinking, okay, in what ways can we support those needs? Like we can't support everything, but I look at the University of Michigan, I look around and I'm like, you know what? I bet a lot of you are just throwing away a coat that's like $400 because you wore it for like a season. Like we want that. And then you learn and grow. Like I thought at first, let's do a coat drive, but really people wanted to shop for their own coats. They didn't want someone else's coat that kind of fit. So then we changed and we shifted. We said, how can we fund this? How can we do this work together? So even when I think I know, there's still so much that like I might not know. So I think being able to be really a learner and know, what do I have to offer? What am I coming with? What do you have to offer? What are you coming with? Where do we meet in the middle, right? And so I think that's sometimes what it looks like, is that kind of partnership of sort of learning what our resources are, what our needs are, and where they can merge to be like mutually beneficial. Offering out our space to community groups. So being, a lot of times space is what you do. Like if they're going to have a meeting or something, they have to pay for that space, right? And so you don't have to pay for the Spectrum Center. Like we can offer up our space. We can partner in that way. So really, I think I try to think like from my position and my place, what is it that I have to offer? And in an institutional setting, I often have resources. That's something I have to offer, whether it's space, funding, the ability to fundraise, networks of communication, right? Like Instagram, like we have a lot of reach that like a smaller organization may not have. So being able to tap, like I can email 200 LGBT staff easily, right? I can just send it in. So like those are the types of things, like we just have knowing what you have. And being able to think where does that plug in? Where do our needs kind of merge? I hope that's kind of helpful. Are there any other questions or comments? I will definitely stay for a little bit, and I'm happy to chat with people and kind of, hear more about the work you do and your role on campus. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, one that we're sort of asking ourselves as we enter the 50th, for sure. Like what do we see as our work, going forward? I think that, a few pieces of this work in the next, 10 years is really cross, let's say like, not collaboration or partnership, but like the merging of advocacy efforts. So being able to see that my needs meet your needs meet my needs, and like together we are moving an agenda. Really early on in the center, like in the 70s, the Gay Liberation Front, their major efforts were in support of a Black student union. It is, about sort of engaging in, and I see this with student groups that, that we're all sort of like doing our own efforts, right? And we could program ourselves all day long. Like we could just do our own things, but we are not as often, not just showing up for one another, but like really investing in each other's causes. Advocating outside of specifically queer needs for the rights of other people, of other groups on our campus, I think needs to be in the future. Getting outside of ourselves and really seeing that, like, if sort of to the original quote, like if there are people for whom climate on our campus is hugely problematic, that impacts all of us. So I think, being able to look at our work and not be so stuck in like, I need to have this whole set of work that's just about the Spectrum Center for a great year-end report, right? Like that's what's expected. is that we are programming and doing things for the Senate. And I think, institutionally, we want to move towards a place of putting all of our efforts towards collective things, because I think that bifurcation is also helpful to those who don't want us to be able to move and change things. And so being able to sort of see what is keeping us from making change, I think is often that we are doing that in silence. And so when we talk about inclusive housing, we have an inclusive housing team. We're not talking just about gender inclusive housing. We're talking about inclusive housing. That means this year we redid websites. So if you go on the housing website and look at a residence hall, as a student with a disability, you know what the room looks like. You know where the exits are. You know where the stairs are. You can decide, is this space going to be something that even works for me? You have way more information. Now that was part of an inclusive housing team. That's all of us together saying like inclusive housing is beyond gender inclusive housing. And we can move things forward when we're all in one room talking about inclusive housing. And then we have actually, and this is just down to like process, like that's one meeting, right? With people in technology, with all the people there that can make changes to a lot of the things there. Instead of like me having a gender inclusive housing meeting and services for students with disabilities having an inclusive housing meeting. And, and then it's sort of lost in like how busy we are. So being able to come together around like key needs and issues. And then I think part of it is also the future of, I would love to see us not be afraid to like celebrate ourselves and our successes. I think, so much of the work sometimes is like what we're fighting for, right? Like, how do we change this? And how do we do this? That's something, in the Spectrum Center that I get all the time, that I realize like my colleagues or students who aren't like surrounded by queer space every day, like they don't get that necessarily. And so how do we like sort of spread that and open up the opportunity to like be in community and celebrate who we are, and create space for that? I think students, we have a lot to learn from students in who are creating their own spaces and celebrating each other. And so I think as a campus center, we've taken on so much of the like need to do this work and change things, which is critical, that we can sometimes lose sight of just like being with each other, just like being in community and like celebrating and having dinner, just, not making like these enormous changes, but just like having fun and sort of affirming each other and building relationships. So I think I've seen, when I look at our history, like that is so much of where we came from, is just being in space together. And even in my leadership and tenure, I think we've lost some of that it has been more like policy, advocacy, and that is really critical. But like I said, we can do that collectively, and that there can be more room to just be in community. And I think that that's what a lot of students are also asking for. Like, where do I find other people? And how do we really like make that easy? How do we connect with people as prospective students? How do we bring them in and like connect people to spaces? So I think a lot more outreach versus waiting for people to come to us. Yeah. Yeah.
already asking questions about the quality community.
Definitely. Yep. I think outreach is huge. This isn't about like queer students per se, but during the pandemic, we started a new initiative at U of M that's called Resource Navigators, where we essentially email every single first and second year student, which on our campus is like 14,000 people, or more than that, I don't even know. And we invite them to a 20-minute conversation. And just that shift, just like the invitation in versus like, if you find the campus life office, or like if you that's a lot to ask when someone's like, where do I, like a first year, like where do I even eat? I'm just kind of like learning about the space that like we, at least, we have noticed we do a lot of waiting. And, we have a lot of students, we can feel busy and not be reaching, but it doesn't mean that we're hearing from or connecting to all the students that need us. And so I think inviting people in from, high school students to graduate students, seniors, that idea of being out in the community. I learned so much more. We're really low on staff right now. We're in a transition. And I did like hours and hours of tabling at events this fall. I don't think there's anything else that I could have done where I learned as much as I did in that activity. Like being out on campus, meeting students every day was so much more helpful than sending out right? Like it is really important to show up, and be I go to our multi-ethnic centers events, like I show up, and it's important to have boundaries, right? And it's important to have to not work like, or as a student to not like over engage, right? But it's also important to like be present. And so I think finding that balance, but absolutely we're also talking about some similar like outreach, to high school students, getting on, if you're not already, some of the places that high school students look for queer, like the, I'm gonna forget, Pride, there's the Pride Index. And being able to really like promote what it is that you have going on, I think is really helpful. We also did an incoming, you might use the SERP incoming student survey or your own, maybe. We built our own first year student survey. And one of the things that we did was ask the question, what departments do you want to hear from? Not how do you identify, like nothing like that. And so everyone, we've never done this, everyone that marked the Spectrum Center, we had agreed if we were going to be a part of it, that we would reach out to them within the first 2 weeks of school. So even adding like an opportunity to say, I want to, not like you have to find my website and sign up for my newsletter. No, you're taking a survey that everyone's taken. And in that survey, we are connecting you to resources. So embedding in things that already exist to create outreach lists, because in queer work, that is part of the hard part, right? Like, who am I reaching out to? I don't know. And so that's part of the problem. And that's why we wait, right? We wait for you to sign up for our newsletter. But there's actually other things we can do besides just wait. We can, really be building out those communication platforms. And certainly I said earlier in the training, like I am not one to speak on social media, but I know that's another opportunity and channel that we definitely utilize a lot. I know there was someone from athletics at the training, like being in spaces where you might engage students who aren't going to come to the center, aren't going to come to your center. Like maybe like at Michigan, if you're an athlete, like that's what you're doing. Like it's like you're So being able to go to the athletic campus, like be in people's spaces. Don't just, stay in our own space and like have people come to us. So I think that's something that we're still working towards in a lot of ways, because it does take a different level of time and energy, and a rethinking around like how we work, in some ways. So we have to like prepare to be working, but not in the center. And yet still have the center operate. So that's it can be hard with small teams. Any other last questions? No, okay. Well, I really, really appreciate the invitation, the opportunity to come. I've never been to WashU. And so I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful campus and have really, really appreciated everyone's time, and being able to learn about your campus. I hope to stay connected. It's really not far away. And so this was just wonderful. And thank you so much for coming.